Sharks are often misunderstood as mindless predators, but in reality, they are highly skilled hunters with senses finely tuned to detect the faintest signs of prey. With over 400 species, these apex predators have evolved to dominate the ocean's food chain, their powerful jaws and razor-sharp teeth capable of inflicting serious damage in seconds. Yet, even with this fearsome reputation, many shark encounters are a result of curiosity rather than aggression. However, when the line between curiosity and predation blurs, the results can be terrifying. What happens when a shark's interest turns deadly? It was a bright, sunny afternoon in early December 2001 when the Mason family decided to spend a day at a beautiful beach near Gansby, South Africa. The beach, known for its stunning views and occasional dolphin sightings, was a popular spot for both locals and tourists. For 7-year-old Tommy Mason, the chance to see dolphins in the wild was the highlight of the trip. He had always been fascinated by marine life, and his parents, Peter and Sarah, were excited to share this experience with him. As the family arrived at the beach, the atmosphere was lively. People were swimming, playing in the sand, and enjoying the warm weather. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and the ocean stretched out in a vast expanse of blue. The Masons set up their spot near the water, laying out towels and unpacking a picnic. Tommy, full of energy and excitement, immediately began scanning the horizon for any sign of dolphins. He had seen dolphins in aquariums before, but the thought of seeing them in their natural habitat was something else entirely. As the afternoon wore on, Tommy played in the shallow water, building sandcastles and occasionally glancing out to sea, hoping to catch a glimpse of a dorsal fin. It wasn't long before Tommy's patience was rewarded. Out in the distance, he saw a fin break the surface of the water. His heart skipped a beat as he pointed excitedly towards it. Peter and Sarah looked up, following Tommy's gaze. They saw the fin, not too far from where the waves gently kissed the shore. It was moving slowly, lazily, as if drifting closer to the beach. Tommy, unable to contain his excitement, started wading into the water, his small feet splashing as he moved towards the fin. In his young mind, the fin belonged to a friendly dolphin, just like the ones he had seen in books and on television. But as he moved deeper into the water, the fin began to grow larger, and the shape beneath it more defined. The water around the fin darkened, and the playful image of a dolphin began to blur into something else, something far more dangerous. What Tommy didn't know, and what his parents were about to realize, was that this was no dolphin. It was a juvenile great white shark drawn to the shallow waters by the scent of fish and seals. Juvenile great whites, though smaller than their adult counterparts, were still formidable predators, and this one, curious and inexperienced, was about to make a terrifying mistake. As Tommy moved closer, calling out in hopes of getting the dolphin's attention, the shark began to circle. Its sleek body moved with the natural grace of a predator, but to Tommy, it seemed like the playful dance of a friendly creature. The shark, still learning how to hunt, was drawn to the boys' splashing, mistaking it for the erratic movements of prey. Back on shore, Peter and Sarah watched their son with growing unease. Something about the fin seemed off. Its shape was more angular, and its movements were more calculated. The realization hit Sarah first, a sudden wave of dread washing over her. She called him to get out, her voice filled with panic. Peter was already on his feet, running towards the water's edge, but he knew he was too far to reach his son in time. As Tommy continued wading deeper into the water, oblivious to the danger he was in, the shark moved closer, its curiosity turning into a predatory focus. The boy's small frame and playful splashes were too much for the shark to ignore. The great white, still inexperienced but driven by instinct, decided to investigate further. The water around Tommy began to ripple as the shark circled him, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface just a few feet away. By now, Tommy could see the full size of the creature beneath the waves, and the realization that this was no dolphin finally struck him. Fear gripped his heart as he saw the massive shape below him, but before he could react, the shark closed in. Back on the shore, Peter was desperately trying to reach his son, his legs pumping through the water as fast as they could. Sarah's screams echoed in his ears, but all he could focus on was the sight of his son standing frozen in the water, just inches away from the shark. In a split second, the shark made its move. It darted forward, its jaws open, ready to bite down on what it thought was easy prey. But just as it was about to strike, a lifeguard who had been watching the scene unfold from a distance sprang into action. He grabbed a rescue board and paddled furiously towards Tommy, adrenaline surging through his veins. The shark's fin cut through the water, coming closer and closer. Tommy was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or cry out. But just as the shark was within striking distance, the lifeguard reached him, pulling him onto the rescue board with a swift, practiced motion. The shark, startled by the sudden commotion and the lifeguard's aggressive movements, veered off course. Its powerful body brushed against the board, and for a moment it seemed like it might still attack. But the lifeguard, using his experience and training, kept the board between the shark and the boy, paddling back towards the shore with all his strength. Peter finally reached them as they neared the shallow water, grabbing his son and helping the lifeguard pull the board to safety. The shark, confused and perhaps realizing its mistake, swam off into deeper waters, its shadow fading into the blue. On the beach, Sarah ran to meet them, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around Tommy. The boy, still in shock, clung to his mother, his small body trembling. The beach, once filled with the sounds of laughter and waves, was now silent, the weight of what had nearly happened sinking in. Tommy was safe, but the close encounter had shaken everyone. The beachgoers who had watched from a distance now gathered, whispering about the near tragedy they had just witnessed. The lifeguard, his heart still pounding, stood with the family, assuring them that the danger had passed. In the summer of 2003, Julia Simmons, a 28-year-old travel enthusiast, arrived in the Maldives for what she hoped would be a dream vacation. The Maldives, with its crystal-clear waters, vibrant coral reefs, and an abundance of marine life, had always been at the top of her travel list. For Julia, an avid snorkeler and lover of the ocean, this was an opportunity to explore one of the world's most stunning underwater landscapes. The day began perfectly. Julia and a few other tourists from her resort boarded a small boat that took them to a secluded snorkeling spot, far from the crowds. The group was guided by an experienced local named Ahmed, who had been diving in these waters for years. He assured them that the reef they were visiting was one of the most beautiful in the area, with an incredible variety of fish and coral. Julia couldn't wait to get into the water. As the boat approached the snorkeling site, Julia could see the reef below, a colorful tapestry of corals, swaying sea anemones and darting fish. The water was so clear that she could make out every detail, even from the surface. After a brief safety briefing from Ahmed, the group began to gear up. Julia double-checked her mask, snorkel, and fins, making sure everything was secure. She had snorkeled many times before, but the excitement of exploring a new reef always brought a sense of anticipation. Once in the water, Julia was immediately mesmerized. The reef was even more beautiful than she had imagined. Schools of parrotfish, angelfish, and clownfish moved gracefully among the corals while the occasional sea turtle glided by, seemingly unbothered by the presence of humans. The underwater world was alive with color and motion, and Julia felt as though she had entered a different realm. As the group moved along the edge of the reef, Julia noticed a large, dark crevice nestled between two coral formations. It was deeper than the other nooks she had seen, and something about it piqued her curiosity. Julia knew that many marine creatures made their homes in such crevices, and she wondered what might be hiding in this one. Perhaps a shy octopus or maybe even a small reef shark. While the rest of the group continued, Julia lingered behind, drawn to the mystery of the dark crevice. She approached slowly, peering into the shadows, her heart beating a little faster with the thrill of discovery. At first, she saw nothing but darkness, but then, as her eyes adjusted, she caught a glimpse of something moving within the crevice, a large, sinuous shape that seemed to flow with the currents. It was a moray eel, a creature Julia had only seen in documentaries. Moray eels were known for their long, snake-like bodies and powerful jaws, filled with sharp teeth. They were solitary animals, often hiding in crevices and caves, waiting for unsuspecting prey to come too close. Julia knew that while these eels could be aggressive if provoked, they usually posed little threat to divers and snorkelers who kept their distance. Fascinated, Julia hovered in the water, watching the eel as it moved within its lair. The creature was larger than she had expected, its body extending far back into the crevice. Its head, with its menacing eyes and wide mouth, protruded slightly from the opening. Julia wanted to get a better look, and without thinking, she reached out toward a nearby piece of coral to steady herself as she floated closer. As Julia's hand moved closer to the coral, the moray eel reacted swiftly. Mistaking her movement for the approach of a predator, or perhaps prey, it shot out of its hiding place with lightning speed. Before Julia could comprehend what was happening, the eel's powerful jaws clamped down on her outstretched arm. The pain was immediate and intense as the eel's sharp teeth sank deep into her flesh. The creature's grip was unyielding, its body thrashing in the water as it tried to pull her further into the crevice. Julia's initial shock quickly turned into panic as she realized the danger she was in. The clear, peaceful waters of the Maldives had suddenly become a scene of terror. Julia struggled against the eel's grip, desperately trying to free herself. She kicked her legs, trying to push away from the crevice. But the eel was strong, its body coiling around her arm as it attempted to drag her closer. Every movement sent waves of pain shooting through her arm, and the water around her began to cloud with blood. The other snorkelers, who were now several meters ahead, hadn't noticed Julia's distress. She was alone, trapped in a battle with a creature that seemed determined not to let her go. Julia knew she had to act quickly. If the eel succeeded in pulling her into its lair, she might not make it out. With her free hand, Julia fumbled for the small dive knife she kept strapped to her leg. Her mind raced as she tried to remember her training and the survival tips she had read about underwater encounters. She knew she had to aim for the eel's head, its most vulnerable spot. The knife felt small and inadequate in her hand, but it was her only chance. Summoning all her strength, Julia struck at the eel's head, trying to hit it in the eyes or the snout. The eel thrashed even more violently in response, but the blows seemed to have some effect. Its grip on her arm loosened slightly, and Julia took the opportunity to pull away. She kicked furiously, pushing herself back from the crevice as the eel continued to writhe in the water. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the eel released its hold on Julia's arm. She pushed herself away from the reef, blood streaming from the deep wounds in her arm. The pain was overwhelming, but adrenaline kept her moving. She had to get away from the eel and get to safety before it attacked again. With her injured arm held close to her chest, Julia swam towards the group, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. The other snorkelers, finally realizing something was wrong, turned back towards her, their faces showing shock and concern as they saw the blood in the water. Ahmed, the guide, was the first to reach her. He quickly assessed the situation, recognizing the severity of Julia's injuries. He signaled to the others to help get her out of the water and back to the boat. Julia's mind was in a haze, the pain and fear making it hard to think, but she followed Ahmed's lead, focusing on nothing but reaching the safety of the boat. The journey back to the boat was agonizingly slow. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through Julia's body, and she could feel herself growing weaker. Ahmed and the others helped her onto the boat, where they quickly wrapped her arm in a makeshift bandage to stop the bleeding. The sight of her mangled arm, with deep puncture wounds and torn flesh, was almost too much to bear. Back on land, Julia was rushed to a nearby medical facility where doctors worked to clean and stitch her wounds. The attack had left her with deep scars, both physical and emotional. But Julia knew she had been lucky. Had the eel been more aggressive, or had she not managed to free herself, the outcome could have been far worse. It was a chilly morning in November 2005 when Akira Yamamoto, an experienced diver and marine biologist, set out for a deep-sea dive off the coast of Hokkaido, Japan. The waters around Hokkaido were known for their rich marine life, but also for their depth and mystery. Akira had spent years exploring the ocean, fascinated by the creatures that lurked in the darkness. On this particular day, he was eager to explore a part of the sea that few had ventured into, a deep trench known as the Abyssal Zone. Akira had been preparing for this dive for months. The Abyssal Zone was not a place to be taken lightly. It was a world of inky blackness, extreme pressure, and cold temperatures. Yet it was also home to some of the most elusive and bizarre creatures on the planet. Akira was particularly interested in the possibility of encountering a giant squid, a creature that had fascinated him since childhood. Giant squids were rarely seen by humans. Their encounters with divers and submarines were often the stuff of legends. As he prepared his gear, Akira went through his routine checks. His diving suit was reinforced to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep, and his oxygen tanks were filled to capacity. He had a harpoon gun strapped to his side, not to hunt but as a precaution. Akira knew that in the deep sea, where light barely penetrated, danger could come from any direction. The dive boat, manned by two of Akira's colleagues, anchored near the edge of the trench. The sky was overcast and the sea was calm, almost too calm. The water was dark and forbidding, but Akira felt a familiar thrill as he looked out at the vast expanse before him. He gave his colleagues a thumbs up, and with a final deep breath, he stepped off the side of the boat and into the water. As Akira descended, the world around him grew darker and colder. The light from the surface quickly faded, replaced by the eerie glow of bioluminescent creatures that drifted through the water. Small fish and jellyfish with glowing bodies flitted around him, but Akira's focus was on the depths below. He continued to descend, his breathing steady, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Minutes passed, and Akira reached the edge of the abyssal zone. The pressure was immense, but his suit held firm. The water was almost black now, with only the faintest traces of light from his headlamp illuminating the way. He moved cautiously, knowing that anything could be lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, Akira noticed a movement to his left. A large shape was drifting slowly through the water. His heart raced as he turned to face it, shining his headlamp towards the creature. It was massive, at least 30 feet long, with long, trailing tentacles that floated eerily in the current. Akira knew immediately what it was: a giant squid. The creature's large, unblinking eyes reflected the light, giving it a ghostly appearance. Akira's excitement quickly turned to caution. The squid was watching him, its tentacles slowly moving as it assessed this strange intruder in its domain. He had read stories of giant squids attacking ships and submarines, their powerful tentacles capable of crushing steel. Akira knew he had to be careful. The squid was a predator, and he was in its territory. Before Akira could react, the squid made its move. In an instant, the creature shot forward, its tentacles reaching out with incredible speed. Akira tried to back away, but the squid was too fast. The long, muscular tentacles wrapped around his legs, pulling him towards its massive body. Akira struggled, kicking out with his legs and trying to free himself, but the squid's grip was like iron. The creature's sharp beak loomed closer as it pulled Akira in. The beak, designed to crush the shells of its prey, was inches away from his torso. Akira knew that if the squid managed to bite him, it would be fatal. Desperation and fear surged through him as he reached for his harpoon gun. With the tentacles still wrapped tightly around him, Akira aimed the harpoon at the squid's head, just above its eyes. He pulled the trigger, and the harpoon shot forward, embedding itself in the squid's flesh. The creature recoiled in pain, its grip loosening slightly. Akira took the opportunity to twist free, using all his strength to break away from the tentacles. But the squid wasn't done yet. It lashed out again, this time wrapping its tentacles around Akira's torso, squeezing with terrifying force. The pressure was unbearable, and Akira could feel his ribs straining under the force. He struggled to breathe as the tentacles tightened, pulling him closer to the beak. In a final act of desperation, Akira reached for the knife strapped to his leg. With a swift motion, he slashed at the tentacles, cutting deep into the squid's flesh. The creature thrashed wildly, releasing Akira as it recoiled in pain. Akira pushed himself away, using his legs to propel himself backward. The squid, now bleeding and disoriented, retreated into the darkness, its tentacles trailing behind it. Akira's breathing was ragged, his body bruised and battered from the encounter. He knew he didn't have much time. His oxygen was running low, and he was still deep in the trench. He quickly checked his gear, making sure nothing was damaged, and began his ascent. The journey back to the surface felt agonizingly slow. Every minute seemed like an eternity as Akira fought to stay conscious. The pain in his chest was intense, and he could feel the cold seeping into his bones. But he kept moving, focusing on the light above him, the promise of safety. Finally, after what felt like hours, Akira broke through the surface. The cold air hit his face, and he gasped for breath, his body trembling from the exertion. The dive boat was waiting for him, and his colleagues quickly pulled him aboard, their faces pale with worry. Akira collapsed onto the deck, his body too weak to move. He could hear his colleagues talking, their voices filled with concern, but his mind was elsewhere. The encounter with the giant squid had shaken him to his core. He had come face to face with a creature of legend, and it had nearly cost him his life. Carlos Ramirez, a seasoned fisherman, had spent countless hours on the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, a place he knew better than the streets of his small hometown in Veracruz, Mexico. On a warm summer day in 2007, Carlos set out on his boat for what he hoped would be a productive day of fishing. The Gulf, with its vast expanse and rich marine life, had always been generous to him, and today felt like it would be no different. Carlos was not alone. His younger brother, Javier, had joined him on this trip, eager to learn the tricks of the trade from his older sibling. The brothers spent the morning casting lines and reeling in fish, their laughter mingling with the gentle sound of waves lapping against the boat. The sun was high and the day seemed perfect, with the blue sky reflecting off the calm waters. As the afternoon wore on, Carlos felt a sudden, strong tug on his line. It was different from anything he had felt before, far stronger, more forceful. His experience told him this was no ordinary catch. He braced himself, gripping the rod tightly as the line pulled harder, almost ripping it from his hands. Javier watched, his excitement growing as he imagined the size of the fish they were about to land. But as Carlos struggled to reel it in, the line suddenly pulled even harder, yanking him forward. The rod bent sharply and Carlos gritted his teeth, using all his strength to keep his balance. This was not a fish. It was something much more powerful. The boat began to tilt slightly, as whatever was on the other end of the line pulled with tremendous force. Carlos yelled at Javier to grab the net, but before he could, the creature on the line made a sudden, violent dive. The line went taut, and in a split second, Carlos was pulled off his feet and overboard. The cold water engulfed him as he plunged into the depths, the line still wrapped around his wrist. Underwater, disoriented and struggling to free himself, Carlos realized what he had hooked, a massive stingray. The creature was enormous, its wingspan stretching wide as it glided through the water, dragging him along. Carlos's heart pounded as he came face to face with the stingray. Its dark eyes seemed to peer into his soul, and its long, venomous barb flicked dangerously close to his body. Stingrays are generally docile creatures, but when threatened or provoked, they can become deadly. Carlos knew this all too well. A sting from the ray's barb could paralyze him, or worse, kill him. Panic surged through him as he struggled against the pull of the stingray, trying desperately to free the line that had entangled his wrist. The stingray, sensing its chance to escape, made another dive, dragging Carlos deeper into the dark water. His lungs burned as he fought to hold his breath, his vision narrowing as the pressure built around him. He knew he didn't have much time before he would black out. The stingray thrashed violently, its barb now inches from his torso. Carlos kicked out, trying to push himself away from the deadly creature. But the stingray's powerful movements made it nearly impossible to break free. As Carlos wrestled with the line, his mind raced. He thought of his family, his brother still on the boat, likely in a panic. He couldn't die here, not like this. Summoning all his strength, Carlos reached for the knife he kept strapped to his belt. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the sheath, but he finally managed to free the blade. With a swift motion, Carlos slashed at the line, cutting it free from his wrist. The stingray, feeling the sudden release of tension, darted away into the dark waters, leaving Carlos floating alone in the murky depths. His chest heaved as he fought to stay conscious, his muscles burning from the exertion. He kicked toward the surface, his limbs heavy and uncooperative. The light from above seemed impossibly far, but Carlos kept pushing, knowing it was his only chance. His vision blurred, and just as he thought he wouldn't make it, his head broke through the surface and he gasped for air, his lungs burning with each breath. Javier, who had been frantically searching for his brother, spotted Carlos and shouted in relief. He quickly threw a rope overboard, and Carlos, exhausted and barely able to move, grabbed hold. Javier pulled him back onto the boat with all his might, and Carlos collapsed on the deck, coughing up water and gasping for breath. The two brothers sat in silence for a moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Carlos's wrist was bruised and bleeding from where the line had dug into his skin, and his entire body ached from the struggle. But he was alive. The stingray had disappeared into the depths, and the calm of the ocean had returned as if nothing had happened. As they headed back to shore, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the water. Carlos leaned back, his body still trembling from the encounter. He had faced death in the form of a creature that most people never see, let alone survive an encounter with. The experience left him shaken, but also with a profound respect for the ocean and its inhabitants. In 2009, Emily Collins, a 28-year-old from Portland, Oregon, decided to take a much-needed break from her hectic life. She booked a vacation to Hawaii, a place she had always dreamed of visiting. Known for its pristine beaches, crystal-clear waters, and abundant marine life, Hawaii was the perfect getaway for someone like Emily, who had a deep love for the ocean. On the second day of her trip, she decided to explore the waters off the coast of Kauai, a place renowned for its coral reefs and the gentle giants of the sea, manta rays. Manta rays were known for their graceful movements and calm demeanor, often seen gliding through the water as if they were flying. Emily had read about them and seen countless pictures, and she was eager to witness these creatures up close. The locals assured her that manta rays were harmless and more interested in plankton than in humans. Armed with her snorkeling gear, Emily made her way to a popular spot where manta rays were often seen. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining brightly overhead and the ocean stretching out like a vast blue carpet. As Emily swam further out, she marveled at the underwater world beneath her. Schools of colorful fish darted in and out of coral formations, and the sunlight filtered through the water, creating a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow. After about an hour of swimming, Emily noticed a large shadow gliding beneath her. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized it was a manta ray. The creature was enormous, its wingspan reaching nearly 20 feet. It moved with an effortless grace, seemingly unbothered by the world around it. Emily was captivated. She had never seen anything so beautiful. Curious and excited, Emily decided to dive down for a closer look. She took a deep breath and submerged herself, kicking towards the manta ray. As she drew nearer, she could see its large eyes and the distinctive cephalic fins on either side of its head, which it used to funnel plankton into its mouth. The manta ray seemed peaceful, and Emily felt a sense of awe as she hovered a few feet above it. However, what Emily didn't know was that this particular manta ray had become increasingly agitated by the constant presence of tourists. It had been harassed before, with people trying to touch it or swim too close, and it had started to associate humans with danger. As Emily got closer, the manta ray sensed her presence and, feeling threatened, began to change its behavior. The ray suddenly stopped gliding and started to thrash its massive wings. The water around Emily churned violently as the manta ray attempted to ward off what it perceived as a threat. The powerful currents created by the ray's movements caught Emily off guard, pulling her downward and away from the surface. The force was so strong that it knocked the air out of her lungs, and she struggled to regain her bearings. Panic set in as Emily realized she was being dragged deeper into the water. The serene encounter she had imagined had turned into a terrifying struggle for survival. She kicked her legs and tried to swim upwards, but the manta ray's thrashing wings made it nearly impossible to break free. Each powerful stroke of the ray's wings sent her spinning, disoriented and desperate for air. Emily's lungs burned as she fought to reach the surface. She was losing strength, and the fear of drowning loomed large in her mind. She glanced upwards and saw the light of the surface growing dimmer, the manta ray's massive body blocking her path. The creature showed no signs of stopping, its large body creating a whirlpool effect that pulled Emily closer to its deadly embrace. As she struggled, Emily felt a sharp pain in her side as the manta ray's wing brushed against her with surprising force. The impact left her dazed, and she could feel her consciousness slipping away. But the thought of her family, her parents, her younger sister waiting for her back home, gave her the strength to keep fighting. Summoning every last bit of energy, Emily twisted her body and pushed herself away from the manta ray with all her might. She managed to break free from the vortex and started to swim towards the light above. The ascent felt agonizingly slow, her body screaming for oxygen, but she forced herself to keep going. Finally, Emily's head broke through the surface, and she gasped for air, the salty water stinging her throat. She could hear distant voices, faint but growing louder. Turning her head, she saw a boat approaching rapidly. It was the tour group she had joined earlier, alerted by the commotion in the water. The guide, a local man named Kimo, reached out to her, and with his help, Emily managed to climb aboard the boat, her body shaking from exhaustion and fear. As the boat sped back to shore, Emily lay on the deck trying to process what had just happened. The manta ray, once a creature of beauty in her eyes, had become a symbol of the unpredictable dangers of the ocean. She had come face to face with a powerful force of nature, and it had almost cost her life. Back on land, Emily was treated for minor injuries and shock. She spent the rest of her vacation away from the water, her love for the ocean tempered by a newfound respect for its inhabitants. The experience had left her shaken, but it also deepened her understanding of the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. Emily's encounter with the aggressive manta ray was a stark reminder that even the most seemingly gentle creatures can become dangerous when provoked or threatened. She would never forget the sheer power of the manta ray's wings, or the feeling of being dragged into the depths. And though she would eventually return to the ocean, she would always carry with her the memory of that day in Hawaii when she came too close to one of the ocean's giants. In 2011, off the coast of Florida, a group of 4 friends decided to spend a summer afternoon on a boating trip, hoping to enjoy some fishing near an old shipwreck. The friends, David, Alex, Mike, and Steve, had heard stories about the rich marine life in the area, including the presence of giant groupers known for their immense size and power. The prospect of catching something big excited them, and they were eager to see what the day would bring. The boat gently rocked on the calm waters as the group anchored near the shipwreck. The outline of the sunken vessel could be seen beneath the clear blue water, hinting at the mysteries below. They set up their fishing gear, with David, the most experienced among them, casting his line first. The others followed suit, each hoping for a big catch. It wasn't long before David felt a strong tug on his line, stronger than anything he had felt before. The rod bent under the weight, and David braced himself, gripping the handle tightly. The others watched with growing anticipation, sensing that this was no ordinary catch. As David struggled to reel in the line, it became clear that they had hooked something massive. After several minutes of intense effort, a dark shape emerged from the depths. It was a giant grouper, its massive body breaking the surface. The fish was enormous, its sheer size and power evident as it thrashed in the water. The group marveled at the sight, realizing they had hooked a true giant. The grouper glared up at them, its unblinking eyes reflecting the sunlight. As David and the others tried to bring it closer to the boat, the grouper suddenly surged with a burst of strength, yanking the line with incredible force. The sudden pull caught David off guard, and before he could react, he was pulled overboard, plunging into the water. Underwater, David found himself face to face with the enormous fish. The grouper, now aggressive and defensive, began to thrash violently, using its powerful tail to strike at David. The force of the blows was overwhelming, knocking the air out of his lungs and disorienting him in the water. The grouper was determined to free itself and was not going to let David off easily. Back on the boat, the others quickly realized what had happened and scrambled to help. Steve threw a rope into the water, hoping David could grab it, while Alex and Mike frantically searched for any sign of their friend. The situation was tense, with everyone fearing the worst. David, meanwhile, was fighting for his life. The grouper's tail struck him repeatedly, each blow making it harder to stay conscious. He knew he had to act fast if he wanted to survive. Summoning all his remaining strength, David managed to grab the rope that had been thrown into the water. Wrapping it around his wrist, he kicked against the grouper's powerful body, trying to break free. The grouper, sensing resistance, thrashed even more violently, creating a whirlpool of bubbles and debris in the water. The situation was dire, with David's strength fading and the grouper refusing to let go. Just as it seemed the fight would never end, the grouper gave one final, powerful thrash before releasing David. The fish disappeared back into the depths, leaving David to be pulled back to the surface by his friends. As David was dragged back onto the boat, he collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air. His body was bruised and battered, his mind reeling from the encounter. The others gathered around him, relieved that he was alive but shaken by the close call. The mood on the boat shifted from excitement to somber reflection as the group processed what had just happened. They had set out for a day of fun and fishing, but they hadn't anticipated the raw power and danger posed by the giant grouper. The fish had nearly dragged David to his end, and the thought of it left them all in shock. As the boat made its way back to shore, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the water. The day's events weighed heavily on their minds, a stark reminder of the unpredictability of the ocean and the creatures that inhabit it. The group had come face to face with one of nature's giants and had narrowly escaped disaster. The memory of that day would stay with them forever, a powerful lesson in respect for the forces of nature.